He built an empire of influence, speeches, charities, foundations, a white man with a spotless public record. But 28 years ago, inside a cold hospital room, he saw his twin sons for the first time. Their skin was not like his, and he walked out without naming them. Today, those same sons stand before him, not as children, but as men the world now listens to. And this time, it's his name they speak out loud. The chandeliers sparkled above the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, but Mayor Graham Dorsey's smile faltered the moment the ballroom doors creaked open. Two young black professionals stepped in, tall, poised, elegant. Their confidence alone pulled the attention of every guest like a shifting tide. They didn't glance around nervously. No, they walked like they belonged here, like they owned the room. And when their eyes landed on him, when one of them leaned toward the microphone and said, "We'd like to begin with a name," Graham felt the blood drain from his face. His name. Whispers rippled through the audience, and in that single moment, under the soft glow of the ballroom lights, the man who had spent his entire life burying the past suddenly saw it walk through the door wearing tailored suits and his own cheekbones. He gripped the edge of the podium, because what they were about to say could burn down everything he'd spent 30 years building. Graham Dorsey stood still in the doorway of the neonatal unit, his palms damp and trembling at his sides. Through the glass, two newborns lay in side-by-side incubators. Wrapped in pastel blankets, they slept soundly, unaware of the storm brewing just outside their world. Tiny fists curled against their cheeks. One gave a soft, dreaming sigh. They were beautiful. They just weren't white. Graham's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the twin boys. Skin the color of golden brown sand, soft curls already beginning to form on their heads. His own image, pale-skinned, red-haired, freckles still clinging to his 35-year-old face, felt like a ghost against the reflection in the glass. "No," he whispered, almost inaudibly. "No, this isn't right." He backed up, ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his racing pulse. The nurse who'd escorted him down the hall had already gone, left him with a quiet congratulations, never suspecting that those two peaceful infants were about to rip a man's world in half. "Graham?" a voice called from down the hall. He turned. A nurse stood holding the door to room 204, her room, his wife, Celeste. "Your wife's awake," the nurse said kindly. "She's asking for you." Celeste lay propped against her pillows, her skin pale, beads of sweat still clinging to her temple. The exhaustion in her eyes couldn't hide the joy there. As Graham stepped in, she smiled weakly. "You saw them?" He didn't answer. "They're perfect, aren't they?" she asked, her voice soft, expectant. "Graham, say something." He didn't move. Instead, he closed the door behind him and leaned against it like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. "Who is he?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, brittle and frayed. Celeste blinked. "What?" "The father, Celeste." He stepped closer now, slowly. "Who is he?" Her smile fell. "Graham, what are you talking about?" "The babies," he said coldly. "They're not mine." "Of course they are." "Don't lie to me!" His shout silenced the room. A passing nurse paused outside the door but moved on. Celeste sat upright, wincing in pain. "They're yours. I swear on everything I love. Graham, we talked about this. My great-grandmother was black. I told you." "That was one relative, generations ago." "It can skip generations. There's science behind this. Mixed-race genetics, recessive traits. Look it up." "I don't need science to tell me what my eyes already did." Graham turned, hands on his hips, pacing. "They look nothing like me. Nothing." "They're 2 hours old." "I'm not a fool, Celeste. I know what this looks like. I have a mayoral campaign launching next year. What do you think this does to me? To us?" Celeste's eyes brimmed with tears. "You're worried about optics? About politics? These are your sons. You cheated on me." "I didn't. Don't insult me. You think I carried twins for 9 months, through bed rest, through preeclampsia, through near-death labor, and now I'd lie to your face?" Silence. a kind of silence that felt like glass before it shattered. Then, Graham said it. "I want a paternity test, and until then, I want you to keep them away from me." Celeste's jaw dropped. "You don't mean that." "I mean it," he said, eyes cold. The DNA test arrived in a sealed envelope Graham never opened. He didn't need it, he said. He had already made his decision. A few days later, a lawyer served Celeste with divorce papers while she was still recovering in the hospital. Included was a generous settlement, enough for a fresh start, but it came with one cruel clause. She could never disclose his identity as their father. Not to the children, not to anyone. Celeste had screamed when she read it, then cried, then signed. A single mother, Celeste boarded a bus bound for Boston, twin boys in her arms. Their names were written on the birth certificates in her own hand. Miles Elijah Dorsey, Micah Isaiah Dorsey. She would raise them on her own. She would never speak of Graham again. Not because he deserved to disappear, but because they deserved to be whole. Celeste sat in the corner of a dimly lit room, holding both twins against her chest as the steam from a nearby kettle fogged the small kitchen window. She hadn't slept in almost 2 days. Not properly. Micah had developed a cough. Miles cried when left alone for more than a few minutes, and she had become a shadow of the woman she was just weeks ago. There was no nurse now, no monitors, no warm hospital lighting, no husband waiting in the hall. Only her, alone. At 32, with nothing but 2 infant sons and a silence that echoed louder than any storm. She stared at the ceiling, as if God lived there. "Do you think I lied?" she whispered aloud, her voice raw. "Do you think I tricked you? You didn't even open the envelope, Graham." Micah stirred. She kissed the crown of his tiny head, then shifted to burp Miles. "Your father," she began, then stopped herself. No, she had promised herself she wouldn't use that word, not yet. Not until she understood how to say it without flinching. Instead, she whispered, "You are mine. That's all that matters right now." She stood in front of the mirror, shirt damp with milk, eyes bloodshot and hollow. She reached for the ring on her finger, slipped it off, stared at it in her palm for a long, long time, then placed it in the bottom drawer beneath old photos and folded dreams. Some things had to be buried if she was going to survive. "Are you sure you want to take on both?" the daycare director asked. "It'll be full-time care, and with your workload." "I'm sure," Celeste said, her voice firmer now. The boys had started to crawl. Miles always faster, Isaiah always watching, calculating. They were curious, bright-eyed, beautiful. She worked nights at a diner, mornings at a pharmacy, evenings she cleaned offices. Sleep came in 4-hour windows. Dreams were rare. But every time she looked at them, her twins, she felt something heavy in her chest shift. She wasn't broken. She was becoming. A storm cracked outside the window as the twins slept side by side in their beds. Celeste stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching them breathe in perfect sync. They were 9 now. Isaiah had read his first college-level science article that morning. Miles had stood up for a bullied kid in class. Her boys, sharp, kind, brilliant. She whispered, "You were never a mistake." A tear slid down her cheek. "You were never the wrong color. You were never too hard to raise. And you never, ever needed a man to define your worth." She closed the door quietly behind her, but as she walked back to her room, she passed the bottom drawer, the one with the ring. She opened it for the first time in years. Not to wear it, just to remember that she had been someone else, once. Someone naive enough to believe that love alone could hold a man accountable. She gently closed the drawer and never opened it again. The applause rolled like thunder as Mayor Graham Dorsey stepped up to the podium beneath a towering crystal chandelier. Dressed in a crisp black tuxedo, hair touched with dignified silver at the temples, he looked every bit the American dream. Self-made, charismatic, untouchable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth and practiced, "welcome to the Dorsey Foundation's 10th Annual Future Forward Gala. Together, we've raised over $25 million this year alone to uplift underrepresented youth across this great city. More applause. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled. A few high-profile donors in the front row stood and clapped. Graham gave his signature half-smile, the one that said, "Yes, I'm that man, and I earned every bit of this." Behind him stood a golden banner with his campaign slogan, "Progress with Integrity." Lucille, his chief of staff, sharp suit, clipboard in hand, intercepted him as he stepped down from the podium. "Poll numbers just came in," she said quietly, handing him a tablet. "Your approval rating went up another 3 points after last week's community college initiative." Graham barely glanced at the screen. "Good. Schedule a photo op with those students next week." Lucille nodded. "We're also getting national traction. New York Times is requesting a profile piece. CNN wants you on State of the Union." He nodded, already half tuned out. Everything was moving exactly as it should. The door clicked shut behind him. He loosened his tie, poured a splash of scotch into a crystal tumbler, and sat in the leather chair overlooking the city skyline. Boston glimmered below. Towers of glass and steel, streets he helped rebuild, a city that now practically bent to his influence. But in the quiet, in the silence between campaign speeches and charity auctions, there were moments when the past scratched faintly at the back of his mind. Celeste, those twin boys. He'd buried them deep, so deep he'd convinced himself they never existed. In the legal world, they didn't. The agreement he made sealed everything airtight. No DNA tests, no paper trail. And still, some nights, when the city slept, he saw 2 shadows in his dreams. Boys without names, eyes like his own, asking why he never looked for them. He threw back the rest of the scotch and stood. There were more important things to focus on. His name was about to be on a Senate ballot. The country was watching. There was no time for ghosts. Graham was mid-conversation with a tech CEO and the city comptroller when Lucille hurried toward him, heels clicking with urgency. "Mayor," she whispered, "we have a situation." Graham's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" "A last-minute speaker substitution. The keynote guests have arrived, and they're requesting to meet with you before they go on." "Now?" He glanced at the clock. "I've got donors to greet." They insisted. "Sir, you'll want to meet them. They're the founders of Cairo Labs, the biotech startup everyone's buzzing about. They developed the AI cancer diagnostics suite." He recognized the name. Cairo Labs was at the center of his city's latest acquisition initiative, a crown jewel project meant to showcase Boston's innovation sector during his campaign. Fine, he thought. Just a handshake and a thank you. Nothing he couldn't charm his way through. "Where are they?" "In the green room." The moment the door opened, the air changed. 2 men stood inside side by side, both tall, sharp suits, poised like chess grandmasters mid-match. And for a full second, Graham forgot how to breathe. Because they looked familiar. Not in the "I've seen you on a newsletter" way. Familiar in a cell-deep way. They had his jawline, his cheekbones, his damn posture. The only thing separating them was their skin, a rich mahogany brown that shimmered under the studio lights, and the absolute stillness in their gaze. "Mayor Dorsey," the one on the left said, stepping forward with a firm handshake. "I'm Dr. Miles Johnson. This is my brother, Dr. Micah Johnson. Thank you for having us tonight." The names hit harder than a punch. Johnson. Celeste's maiden name. Graham blinked once, twice. They knew. He could see it in the way they stood, not confrontational, not angry, but certain of who he was and who he wasn't. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. How did you—" he started. Micah answered for him, his tone light, eyes sharp. "That's an interesting first question from a man meeting his sons after nearly 3 decades. The word sons detonated in Graham's chest. He stumbled backward slightly, catching the doorframe to steady himself. He began again, but the words dried in his mouth. "Relax," Miles said calmly. "We're not here to ruin your night." Not yet, Micah added, almost playfully. Their delivery was smooth, elegant, but it was clear this wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. Lucille poked her head in. "Mayor, donors are waiting." "I'll be out in a moment," Graham replied quickly, eyes still locked on the twins. As the door clicked shut behind her, the silence stretched. Finally, Micah said, "We're going to the podium in 20 minutes. Miles added, "We have something to say, something relevant." Graham's throat tightened. "What are you going to say?" "We'll let the room decide," Miles replied with a faint smile. "But I think you'll find it illuminating." Graham finally closed the door behind Lucille, though his hand lingered on the handle. His instincts screamed to run. Back to the ballroom, to the cameras, to the version of his life where everything made sense. But the truth was already in the room, and it had his DNA. Miles stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "Relax," he said again. "No lawsuits, no press, not tonight at least." You're Celeste's boys," Graham finally said. Micah smirked. She used to hate when people said that. They're not boys, they're men. That's what she'd correct them with. "She told you about me?" "No," Miles replied, voice even. "She never said a word." Graham blinked, confused. "Wait, then how—" "Genetics," Micah interrupted, rolling his sleeve up to reveal a small medical tattoo near his wrist. "We both have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, inherited. Runs exclusively through paternal lines. We needed family history to get proper treatment," Miles continued. "And when the records came up blank, we started digging." "We were persistent," Micah said with a glint in his eye. "Apparently, we got that from you." Graham felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You broke the NDA," he said flatly. "We didn't have to," Miles shrugged. "Your name's on buildings, your face is on campaign posters, and Celeste, well," Micah's expression softened. "She kept everything." Micah opens an old shoebox. Inside, newspaper clippings, magazine covers, a campaign flyer. "Graham Dorsey for Senate, a man you can trust." And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. DNA results, never opened. "She never threw it out," Micah had whispered. "She wanted us to know you, someday." "She passed away 2 years ago," Miles said quietly. "Breast cancer. Fast. Brutal." Graham's throat clenched. I didn't know." "No," Micah said. "You didn't want to know." "You had resources. You could have found us at any point. We weren't hiding." "I thought she'd moved on." "She did," Miles replied. "And she still made space for you, in memory, in grace." The room fell silent. Graham suddenly looked very small in his perfectly tailored suit. "You think we're here for revenge?" Micah asked. "To expose you?" "I don't know," Graham admitted, the words barely making it out. "We didn't come for revenge," Miles said softly. "We came for the truth, and maybe to see if the man behind the podium still remembers who he used to be." "You abandoned 2 babies in a hospital," Micah added, over skin color. Graham closed his eyes. "There's no justification," he whispered. "I made a terrible, terrible mistake." Micah studied him. "Yes, you did." Lucille knocked again. "Mayor, photographers are waiting. 2 minutes." "I'll be there," Graham called back without turning. He looked at his sons. His sons. "Are you planning to tell them?" he asked. "The audience?" Micah shrugged. "We'll talk about the reason behind our research, why we developed our diagnostic software, about losing our mother, about what absence teaches a child. We won't name names," Miles added. "But we won't protect ghosts either." Graham stared. "And what happens after tonight?" "That depends," Miles said. "On what?" "On whether you're still trying to outrun your past," Micah said, "or finally ready to stand in it." Miles moved toward the door. "Oh, and Mayor," he said with a final glance back, "try not to faint when we say your name this time." The lights dimmed as the event coordinator stepped to the mic. "And now, for our keynote speakers, 2 visionary leaders in medical technology whose recent breakthrough in early cancer diagnostics is already changing lives across the nation. Please welcome Dr. Miles Johnson and Dr. Micah Johnson of Cairo Labs." Applause thundered through the room. Graham Dorsey sat frozen at his table near the front, hands clenched beneath the tablecloth. His signature smile plastered across his face like a mask of wet paper. Miles and Micah walked to the podium with synchronized ease, matching strides, matching suits, matching calm. You could hear a pin drop when they began. Miles said, "Thank you. We're honored to be here tonight, and we thank the Dorsey Foundation for their invitation and their commitment to innovation in public health." Micah stepped forward and said, "For those unfamiliar with our work, our company, Cairo Labs, has developed AI-assisted diagnostics capable of detecting early-stage cancers with over 93% accuracy, including several strains often missed in standard screenings." Polite applause followed, but there was tension, an unspoken knowing in the air. Some in the audience sensed something different about this speech. Graham could feel it in his chest. They weren't just here to pitch software. Miles said, "We began this work not as entrepreneurs, but as sons." Micah paused beside him, the spotlight catching the faint shine of moisture in his eyes. 5 years ago, our mother, Celeste Johnson, passed away from breast cancer. By the time it was discovered, it had already metastasized. A hush swept through the ballroom. The doctors said if it had been caught just a few months earlier, she might have had a fighting chance. But she didn't, because she didn't have access to early testing, because she couldn't afford to wait in line, because systems fail the people who need them most. She was everything to us, our teacher, our protector, our compass. She worked 3 jobs and still made it to every school event. She gave us books instead of excuses, dignity instead of pity, and never once let us feel like we were missing anything. A few audience members dabbed their eyes. Graham's heart pounded. He hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in over 2 decades, not in a voice old enough to echo her own.
Our mother taught us to turn pain into purpose. She told us that loss doesn't have to destroy you. It can reshape you.
She also taught us silence isn't always strength. And then they paused. Micah's eyes scanned the room, settling briefly, just briefly, on Graham's face. Graham froze. This was it.
The reveal.
The public collapse. Micah held the stare for just a second longer, then looked away. There were things she never told us, truths she carried quietly. But we found our own way to them. Eventually. Graham's throat tightened. A few people in the crowd glanced in his direction, unsure why. We don't stand here today because of legacy, or inheritance, or connections. We built this with our own hands, through trial and error, student debt, scholarships, sleepless nights, trial after trial. We did this because our mother showed us how to rise when no one is watching. Tonight, we remember her, and we honor every child who's ever asked, "Why weren't you there?" Every parent who held it all together when they shouldn't have had to. A beat of silence followed. Then, thundering applause. Graham couldn't move. His eyes stung, though he hadn't blinked in minutes. They hadn't named him, but they didn't have to. Everyone in that room had felt the edge of something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. As the twins walked off stage, they made eye contact with him again, this time with something colder. "We didn't expose you. Yet." The gala buzzed behind the glass doors, jazz playing softly, champagne flutes clinking, laughter rising. But out here it was quiet. Graham leaned against the stone railing, the night wind tugging at his tie. His heart still hadn't steadied. The twins' speech kept echoing in his mind like a courtroom verdict. "You're running again." The voice came from the shadows behind him. He turned. Micah stepped out first, followed by Miles. Same posture, same eyes, same gravity. "No cameras here," Miles added, walking toward him. "No applause, just us." Graham straightened. "I thought we were done." Micah tilted his head. "You thought that speech was the end?" "No," Graham said slowly. "I just didn't expect mercy." Miles gave a faint smile, cold and unreadable. "Wasn't mercy," he said. "It was restraint." Silence settled between the 3 men. Boston blinked below them like a city unaware its king had just been pulled off his throne. I don't understand what you want, Graham admitted. You will, Micah replied. But not yet. This isn't a punishment, Miles added. We're not here to destroy you. Then what is this? Graham snapped, his voice rising. Because whatever this is, it's already a reckoning, Micah said simply. Not for who you were, for who you are now. Graham opened his mouth, then shut it. The word landed like a gavel. Reckoning. Micah walked slowly to the edge of the terrace, looking out at the city skyline. Our mother taught us forgiveness is earned, he said quietly. Not bought, not begged for. She didn't leave us angry, Miles added. She left us curious about you, about what kind of man would turn his back and never turn around. I thought she hated me, Graham said, voice hollow. She didn't. And you? Micah looked at him for a long time. We're not sure yet. The door behind them opened again. Lucille poked her head out. Mayor, press photos in 5 minutes. I'll be there, Graham said, eyes still on his son's. Lucille nodded and left. Miles stepped forward. You'll go back inside. Smile for cameras. Shake hands. Sell your dream. But tomorrow, Micah added, you'll meet us, privately. And then, Graham asked, then we see if you're a man or just a headline. Without another word, they turned and disappeared back through the doors, leaving Graham alone in the wind. And for the first time in decades, he felt small. Graham arrived at City Hall 2 hours early. He hadn't slept. His shirt collar was too tight. The tie he wore had been knotted and unknotted 3 times already. He stood by the window, staring down at the traffic inching through Boston's financial district, people moving with certainty, unlike him. His phone buzzed. Lucille, text. They're here. He closed his eyes, took a breath, then sat behind the desk that had, until now, made him feel untouchable. The door opened. Micah and Miles walked in, tailored, collected, precise. Not angry, just focused. They didn't wait to be offered a seat. They knew they belonged here. Good morning, Miles said, taking the chair across from Graham. Morning, Graham replied, standing slowly. Thank you for coming. We said we would, Micah added. A silence stretched. Then Graham spoke, his voice cautious. I want to understand. Why now? After all these years, why not go public? Why not destroy me after what I did? Miles exchanged a glance with his brother, then said, Because we're not here for revenge. We're here for legacy. Graham's brow furrowed. Legacy? Micah leaned forward. Our mother deserved more than struggle and silence. She deserved a name, one that stands for something. And you have a platform. You want me to speak publicly? Graham asked. Miles gave a faint smile. Not yet. That comes later. First, we talk about what happens next, what you owe, and what you're capable of. Micah placed a sleek black folder on the desk and slid it toward him. Graham hesitated before opening it. Inside were documents, proposals, charts, a foundation charter. At the top of the first page, the Celeste Johnson Initiative for Single Parents, a nonprofit dedicated to providing education, medical support, and housing grants to single-parent families. Graham stared, flipping slowly through the pages. You want me to fund this? He asked. No, Miles said evenly. We want you to lead it. His head snapped up. Micah clarified. This isn't a photo op. We want you to attach your name, your face, your voice. A full endorsement. We want you to speak about absence, about accountability. Graham sat back, stunned. You want me to admit everything? Miles nodded. Eventually, yes. Not in scandal, in service, Micah said. You can be more than the man who left, but you'll have to start by standing in the shadow of who you were. Graham closed the folder, slowly. His hands trembled slightly. This wasn't blackmail. It was an opportunity. A painful one, but a chance. He looked up. And if I agree? Micah's answer was calm. Then we'll talk about whether we can be something more than strangers who share blood. Graham sat in silence, flipping through the proposal again. His name, Her name. A foundation built in honor of the woman he had abandoned. He swallowed hard. "This is public," he said slowly. "It'll raise questions. People will ask why this is personal for me." "They should," Miles said. Micah leaned forward. "You've built a career on helping others, from a safe emotional distance. But this isn't about charity. It's about truth." Graham looked at them, something flickering in his eyes. "Do you want me to confess? Stand in front of cameras and say I fathered 2 children I never raised?" Miles paused. "No," he said. "We want you to earn the right to say you know us." Micah opened a tablet and slid it forward. On screen, a phased plan. Phase 1, the initiative. Public launch of the Celeste Johnson Initiative. Initial grant of $5 million from Dorsey Foundation. Graham to deliver keynote address, honoring single parents, including the one he failed. Phase 2, community engagement. Graham to host town halls with single mothers. Feature real stories, not scripted optics. Media campaign with authenticity. Even leaders get it wrong. Here's how we start making it right. Phase 3, private reckoning. Personal time with Miles and Micah. No press, no politics. "You don't get to be our father," Micah clarified. "But you can show us the man you've become." Graham's eyes moved over the screen slowly, like someone decoding his own sentence. "This will cost me votes," he muttered. Miles didn't blink. So did ignoring us. "I'll be called weak, hypocritical, racist, a fraud." "You were all of those," Micah said bluntly. "The question is, are you still?" Graham exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. "I always believed I had to protect my reputation, to protect the work I do." Miles shook his head gently. "The work isn't the excuse. It's the purpose." "What do you mean?" "You've spent your life building systems to help vulnerable people, but the 2 most vulnerable people in your world, your own sons, were left behind because you didn't want to be seen standing next to them." Micah added, "And now, you either reclaim that mistake or keep pretending your success came without cost." Graham stood, walking to the window again. The city looked different now, not like a kingdom, more like a mirror. Flawed, but full of possibility. He turned back, voice lower now. "What if I try, and it still doesn't matter to you? What if I fail?" Miles answered quietly. "Then at least our children will know we gave you the chance to TR." That stopped him. Our children. There was a future in that sentence. One he could still be a part of, if not as a father, then as something better than a stranger. Lucille stepped in. "Sir, press is asking if you're ready for the gala recap post. Should we send them your usual highlight reel?" Graham glanced at the twins. "No," he said. "Tell them I'll send a personal statement. Something new." Lucille blinked. "New?" "Yes." He stood tall. "Tell them I'm about to say something I should have said a long time ago." Lucille gave a slow nod, sensing a shift, not just in strategy, but in soul. As she left, Graham turned back to the twins. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. Micah replied, "Good. Because forgiveness isn't the goal," Miles added. "Truth is."
The long mahogany table gleamed beneath modern hanging lights. The room buzzed with quiet energy as donors, corporate partners, and city leaders took their seats.
They had gathered for what they believed was a routine quarterly strategy briefing. None of them knew the script had been rewritten overnight. At the head of the table, Graham adjusted his cuffs, cleared his throat, and rose. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice steady. "I want to start today not with numbers or forecasts, but with a name." He looked to the side of the room, where Miles and Micah stood in silence, arms crossed, backs straight. "Celeste Johnson." Murmurs rippled across the room. Graham continued. "She was the mother of 2 boys born nearly 3 decades ago. She raised them alone. No help, no acknowledgement, no apology." His voice trembled, but he did not stop. "I was their father, and I left them. I left her." A collective silence fell like a dropped stone. No one breathed. Some board members exchanged glances, disbelief, discomfort. One donor whispered, "Is this scripted?" Graham raised his hand gently. "There is no PR strategy here, no damage control. This isn't a confession for pity. It's a correction of a lie I lived, a silence I cultivated, and a truth I buried." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the twins. "These two men," he said, "are not just keynote speakers or startup founders. They are not here because of a sponsorship. They are here because they are my sons." A gasp somewhere near the end of the table. Miles remained still. Micah's expression flickered. Surprise, not at the words, but at how deeply they landed. Graham looked down, hands trembling slightly. "I spent years building a reputation for integrity while denying the most important truth of my life. I left behind 2 children because I feared judgment, feared exposure, feared what their existence might say about me." He let the silence hang. "Today, I stopped being afraid." A hand went up. Richard Klein, a senior board advisor. "Graham," he said carefully, "are you saying this now because of some kind of legal action?" "No," Graham said firmly. "There is no lawsuit, no scandal, no story being run tomorrow." "Then why?" another member asked, confused. "This could end your campaign." Graham looked them all in the eye. "Because for the first time in my life, I want to be more than electable. I want to be accountable." He turned again to the twins. "Miles, Micah, if you're still willing, I want to publicly support the foundation you've built in your mother's name. And I want this board to know that everything I've built, everything I've earned, means nothing unless I can stand beside the people I once turned away from." Another silence. Then, Miles stepped forward. He spoke calmly. "The Celeste Johnson Initiative will partner with the Dorsey Foundation for a multi-year grant cycle. Our focus, healthcare access for single parents and early detection tools in under-resourced communities." Micah added, "And while we're not here to build family ties, we believe people, institutions, can evolve when they choose truth." The meeting adjourned slowly. Some members stayed back, stunned. Others left in a hurry, uncomfortable with the weight of honesty in a room made for polished fiction. Graham sat down again, drained but lighter. Lucille approached from the doorway. "That wasn't the man I used to work for," she said softly. Graham looked at her. "Good," he replied, "because the old one wouldn't have survived what's coming next." He nodded. "I'm not trying to survive it. I'm trying to walk through it." The room was quiet, dimly lit by amber sconces. A single round table in the center. No waiters hovering, no cameras, no press. Just Graham, Miles, and Micah. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 lives tied together by a truth too long hidden. Graham cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." Micah sipped his water. "We weren't sure you'd ask." Miles gave a faint smile. "We're here. That's something." Silence settled briefly between them. Then menus were passed around. A waitress took orders quickly and left. It was just them now, and the wait. Graham spoke first, softly. "I watched your interviews last night. TEDx, Johns Hopkins. You two are remarkable." Miles glanced at his brother, then back at him. "We get that from our mother." Micah added, "She was always 3 steps ahead, emotionally and strategically." Graham nodded. "I believe that." Another pause. "You know," Miles said, tone shifting gently, "I used to wonder what you looked like. When I was a kid, I imagined you were in the military, or a spy, something important." Micah chuckled. "I thought maybe you were dead. That would have made more sense than silence." Graham's smile vanished. He lowered his eyes. "I was weak. That's the only word for it. I looked at you, and I saw something I didn't understand, and I let fear dictate everything that followed." Miles leaned forward. "Did you ever think about us? Like, really think about us?" "Every day," Graham admitted. "But I told myself that by disappearing, I was doing you a favor." Micah raised an eyebrow. "By erasing yourself? By not contaminating your life with shame or confusion? I thought maybe it was cleaner that way." Miles stared at him for a long moment. Here's what actually happened, he said, measured. I spent most of my teenage years wondering what part of me you saw and decided to leave behind. Micah added, and I spent years trying to make sure that whatever that part was didn't define me. Graham blinked rapidly. His composure faltered. I don't have an answer for that, he said, barely audible. But I'm here now, if you'll let me listen, or speak, or just sit quietly across the table. The waitress returned with the food. Chicken and herb risotto, grilled salmon, pasta primavera. It sat untouched for a while. Then Micah spoke again. She never hated you, you know, our mom. Graham looked up, surprised. She had every right to, Micah continued. But she didn't. She used to say you were a good man who let one bad moment shape the rest of your life. Graham exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding that breath for 28 years. I thought she'd spit my name every time it crossed her lips. She never spoke it, Miles said gently. Not once. But she left a space where it would have been, and she filled it with grace. The food had been picked over. Conversation had slowly shifted. They talked about Celeste's obsession with crossword puzzles, Miles's stubborn streak, Micah's debate team victories, their fear of frogs, their love for Miles Davis, the fact that neither had ever been to a baseball game. Wait, never? Graham blinked. You're both Boston-born and never saw the Sox play? Nope, Miles grinned. Too busy surviving. Well, that changes this weekend, Graham said before catching himself. The twins paused. A beat. Then, Micah shrugged. We'll think about it. Miles smiled, just slightly. We'll let you know. They stood near the door. The night breeze seeped in as patrons exited behind them. Graham extended his hand. Micah looked at it, then shook it. Miles followed, but before releasing, he held it just a second longer. Then he said, This doesn't mean anything yet. I know, Graham replied. But it could. Graham nodded. I hope it does. They walked off into the Boston night, not side by side, but not far apart either. Graham stood there a moment longer, the sound of their footsteps echoing like possibility. Graham hesitated in the entrance of the small, cozy bookstore. Warm light spilled over oak shelves lined with biographies, poetry, and vintage maps. It smelled of dust, ink, and something soothing, like memories that aged well. He spotted them at the back. Micah and Miles sat across from a man in a tweed blazer and wire-rimmed glasses. His skin was warm brown, hair graying at the temples, and his laugh filled the room even before Graham reached the table. Micah looked up first. You came, he said. You invited me, Graham replied. Miles gestured toward the empty chair. Have a seat. Graham lowered himself slowly, glancing at the man between them. Mr. Dorsey, the man said, extending a hand. I'm Barney Taylor. Graham shook it firmly. I've heard a lot about you, Barney added, and I'm sure you've heard nothing about me. Graham offered a tight smile. Not until recently. Barney turned back to his tea, then said simply, I met Celeste when the boys were 7. She was teaching an after-school science program. I was the janitor who kept making up excuses to clean the lab twice. Micah grinned. He was terrible at flirting. I was dignified, Barney said with mock pride. You tripped over a microscope cart. Chivalrously. Laughter filled the table. Even Graham chuckled. But beneath it, something flickered in his eyes, a strange feeling. Pride? Gratitude? Jealousy? Maybe all three. Barney sipped his tea and looked at Graham with soft seriousness. I'm not here to challenge your place, he said gently. I know what I am, and what I'm not. You're the man who raised them, Graham said. Barney nodded once. I never tried to replace you, I just showed up when it mattered. Graham looked down at his hands. Barney continued. Micah taught me patience. Miles taught me how to hold space for silence. I got to watch them grow into the kind of men I wish the world had more of. He paused. And when Celeste passed, they carried her legacy like armor. All I had to do was remind them they weren't alone. The conversation drifted into sports, college days, and favorite jazz albums. But Graham mostly listened. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood something crucial. This wasn't a battle to win. It was a space to honor. When it was time to leave, Barney stood and looked him in the eye. "You still have a chance," he said softly. "Don't waste it." Graham nodded, quietly, and as he watched Barney walk away, hand briefly resting on each son's shoulder, Graham didn't feel bitter. He felt grateful. For the first time in his life, he realized that being a father had nothing to do with DNA. It had everything to do with showing up. The space buzzed with energy, students showcasing photography inspired by stories of resilience. Micah and Miles stood near a cluster of canvases, engaged in conversation with young artists when they saw him. Graham. He lingered near the back, not in a suit, but in a casual button-down, sleeves rolled. No entourage, no press. Just him. Micah nudged his brother. He showed up. Miles raised an eyebrow. Didn't think he would. Graham walked up slowly, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the art before meeting theirs. "You weren't on the invite list," Miles said dryly. "I asked around," Graham replied. "Didn't want to interrupt, just wanted to see the world you're investing in." Micah nodded once. "It's not ours. We're just lending our voice." A brief pause. Then Graham offered something quiet, almost hopeful. "I was wondering if I could see you again. Maybe dinner next week?" The question hung in the air like a fragile bridge. Miles and Micah exchanged a glance, a wordless, silent conversation only twins could share. Then Miles turned back. "All right," he said. "But no tuxedos, and no speeches." "No politics either," Micah added. Graham smiled, small and real. "Just dinner." As Graham left the venue, he passed a photo titled, "Healed Doesn't Mean Forgetting." He stopped and read the caption beneath it. "Sometimes the only apology that matters is a consistent presence over time." He stood there a moment longer, hands folded in front of him, then walked out into the night, quietly hopeful, knowing that the first step was never the last, but it was the one that mattered most. The twins sat side by side on the floor, a weathered shoebox between them. The lid was off. Inside, loose papers, photographs, and one envelope they'd never dared open. Miles held it now. His thumb brushed over Celeste's delicate handwriting. "For Graham, only if he ever comes back." Micah looked over. "You sure about this?" Miles nodded. "It's time," he texted. The knock came just after 9 p.m. Graham opened the door, surprised to see both sons. No words, just the envelope. Miles placed it in his hand. "She wrote this after we turned 10, he said. "Never told us what was inside." Micah added, "Said we'd know when the time was right." Then they left. Graham stared at the envelope in his palm. Fingers trembling, he sat down at the kitchen table and slowly tore it open. He unfolded the letter. Celeste's handwriting danced across the page. Soft curves, delicate loops. "Graham, if you're reading this, I'll assume the impossible happened. That somehow the walls between us cracked enough for light to come through. I won't waste this moment with bitterness. I carried enough of it once. It poisoned me more than you. I want you to know, I never hated you. I hated the silence, the way you vanished and left questions behind that only you could answer. But I never wished you harm. I prayed, more than once, that you'd find your way back. Our sons, they are your echo in more ways than you'll admit. And my greatest gift to them was never speaking badly of you. I let them build their idea of you, not to protect you, but to protect their hope. If you ever show up again, don't apologize. Show up with presence, not pity. That will be enough." Celeste. Graham's hands shook. His eyes flooded. He pressed the paper to his chest, unable to breathe for a moment. This was her voice. This was her love. This was grace he didn't deserve, and yet somehow received anyway. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. A chessboard sat half-played on the coffee table. Books stacked unevenly near the fireplace. A framed photo of Celeste smiled from a shelf. Graham sat on the couch, fingers interlaced, posture uncertain. Miles poured tea into 3 ceramic mugs. Micah entered from the hallway, tossing a small envelope on the table. "What's that?" Graham asked. Micah took a seat. "It's from one of the students we met through the initiative. Single mom, teenager, says our foundation helped her believe her daughter could finish high school." Graham picked it up, reading silently. Handwritten, honest, hopeful. He set it down and leaned back. "You built something that's changing lives," he said softly. Micah nodded. "We built it because of the lives we almost didn't get to have." There was no bitterness in his voice, just clarity. Graham looked from one son to the other. "I used to think legacy meant buildings, streets with your name on them, laws passed, statues, elections." He paused. "But lately, I wonder if it's really just the people who can say your name without flinching." Miles smiled slightly. "Statues don't hug you back. Or forgive you," Micah added. Silence stretched between them, not tense, just heavy with years unsaid. Then Miles leaned forward. "You asked once what happens next." Graham nodded. "I still don't know what to hope for." Micah studied him for a long beat. "Don't hope to be our father," he said plainly. "That title belongs to someone who earned it." "I understand," Graham replied. "But you can still be part of our story," Miles offered. "If you keep showing up, if you keep listening." "I want to," Graham said. "Even if I never hear the word Dad. I just want to be someone worth remembering. Not for who I was, but for who I finally became." They stepped outside together. The sun was sinking below the rooftops, spilling gold over the skyline. The wind was cool, but not cold. The city moved below, loud, alive, indifferent. Above it, 3 men stood quietly. Not a family yet, but maybe a foundation. The apartment was quiet. Not sterile, not lonely, just still. Graham moved through the kitchen making coffee, 1 mug instead of 2, out of habit. He opened the window to let in the morning air. On the counter sat a folded newspaper. Its front page showed him, standing beside Miles and Micah, with the headline, "Dorsey launches Celeste Johnson Initiative, a redemption in motion." He didn't flinch when he saw it this time. He just folded it and placed it aside. He sat at his desk and opened a drawer. Inside, the old, unopened DNA test results envelope. Yellowed at the edges. Untouched for 28 years, still sealed. He picked it up, held it, then slowly placed it in the trash. He didn't need proof anymore. Crowds roared as the Boston Red Sox took the field. Vendors passed hot dogs, laughter spilled from every row, and the scent of peanuts and fresh turf filled the air. Graham sat beside Miles and Micah. No cameras, no speeches. Just 3 men watching a game under a cloudless sky. Miles leaned over. "Pretty sure Mom would have hated this." "She would have brought a book," Micah added. Graham laughed, really laughed. "She'd have rolled her eyes at the noise." "And called the sport strategic standing around," Miles said. Micah grinned. "She always did hate anything with uniforms." The crowd erupted as a home run sailed over left field. Graham didn't even see it. He was too busy watching the way his son smiled. Graham stood in front of a headstone etched with Celeste Johnson, beloved mother, tireless fighter, gentle light. He knelt down slowly and placed a small object at the base. Her wedding ring. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he whispered. "I'm just thanking you for raising them, for leaving space for me, even when I didn't deserve it." The wind stirred the trees above, whispering through the branches like a blessing. He stood and walked away. Graham shaking hands with scholarship students. Miles leading a youth health seminar. Micah walking with Graham, showing him blueprints for a new center. A plaque unveiled. "In honor of Celeste Johnson. Because grace deserves legacy." Graham walked alone, coat wrapped tight, passing glowing streetlights and quiet shops closing down for the evening. His phone buzzed. Text from Micah. "Dinner, Friday. You in?" He smiled. Small, but sure. Graham replied, "I'll be there." He looked up at the stars just beginning to appear, for the first time in a lifetime. He wasn't running from the past. He was walking toward the future, one step at a time.